When I first dove into The Body Keeps the Score and came across Tom's story, this Vietnam vet, man, it really threw me for a loop.
Oh, yeah. What was it about his story that got to you?
Well, here's the thing, right? He comes home perfectly fine, no physical wounds, but he's totally shattered inside, can't sleep a wink, haunted by these nightmares, the battlefield just replaying in his head night after night.
I can only imagine. The mind can be a battlefield in itself, even when the physical one is miles away.
Exactly. And it's like he's emotionally numb, almost like a ghost just drifting through life, except when these bursts of anger just explode out of him, seemingly out of nowhere. And to top it all off, he keeps putting himself in these crazy, dangerous situations, almost like he needs that adrenaline rush just to feel something, anything at all.
It's like he's chasing that edge, that intensity, just to feel alive again. A common thread I see, sadly, with a lot of folks who have come back from similar situations.
What really struck me, though, wasn't just, the PTSD diagnosis. It's like his whole sense of self, his identity, had been completely warped by the trauma.
Reshaped by those intense experiences, yeah. It's not just a surface level thing, is it?
And the thing is, he's not some isolated case.
Yeah.
Right? Kolk talks about kids who grow up with violence at home years down the line. They still haven't escaped it, haven't moved past it.
Yeah.
Their reactions, their whole way of being, it's different.
Sadly, that's often the case. The impact of those early experiences, especially when it comes to violence and trauma, they can echo throughout a person's entire life.
And that's precisely what we're diving deep into today. How does trauma, according to The Body Keeps the Score, physically become ingrained in us? It's one thing to understand intellectually that trauma leaves its mark, but have you ever paused to truly consider how it's etched into our very core, how it becomes a part of us on a physical level?
It's a question that haunted the field for a long time, For years, we were stuck in these limited ways of thinking about mental health psychoanalysis or just throwing medication at the problem, hoping something would stick.
Right, like slapping a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches.
Exactly. What Kolk did was revolutionary. He brought together all these different fields, neuroscience, developmental psychology, interpersonal neurobiology, to really get to the root of how trauma impacts us. It was a game changer.
It's like we finally had the right lens to see what was going on, to really understand it, right?
Precisely. And one of the most powerful concepts he brings to the table is this idea of the bottom-up brain. How our primal instincts, our survival mechanisms, can often completely override our conscious thought, especially in the face of trauma.
So it's like even when we know better, our bodies might be reacting in a completely different way. Can you unpack that a little for us?
Absolutely. Imagine your brain is like a house, okay? And this house, it's built in stages. Down in the basement, the foundation, you've got the reptilian brain, the brainstem. This is the oldest part, the most primitive. It's what keeps you alive right now. Breathing, heartbeat, all the essentials.
Keeping the lights on, so to speak.
Exactly. One floor up, you've got the mammalian brain or the limbic system. This is where your emotions hang out, where your danger detectors are constantly scanning the environment. And this part, it's heavily influenced by your early life, your experiences in those formative years.
Okay, so I've got the basement, the first floor. What's on the top floor?
That's where the neocortex resides. The thinking part of the brain. Logic, planning, language, all that higher level stuff lives up there. But here's the catch in the neocortex. It develops much later than that emotional brain downstairs.
Interesting. So if we're sticking with this house analogy, you're saying that when a threat appears, it's like the smoke detectors in the basement are going haywire, everyone's scrambling around into panic before anyone even thinks to check if there's an actual fire.
Bang on. That's our survival mechanism in action. It bypasses all the fancy rational thinking upstairs and goes straight to, get out now. It's about survival, pure and simple.
It's like that feeling when you jerk back from something before you even register what it is.
Exactly. That's your lower brain doing its thing. Pure instinct, no time for contemplation. Now, in a normal stress response, your body kicks into gear, pumps out adrenaline, gets you ready to fight or flee, right?
Yeah.
Danger passes, hormones settle down, you return to a state of equilibrium.
But with the trauma's like that fire alarm that just won't stop blaring.
That's a great way to put it. The threat, whether it's physical, being trapped, restrained, or even just feeling utterly powerless, it triggers those alarms. But here's the thing with trauma, you get stuck in that state of high alert because the danger doesn't actually go away, or at least your body doesn't perceive it that way. It never gets the signal to stand down.
In Kolk, he talks about this really powerful example. It's tough to hear, but I think it illustrates this point perfectly. They did these experiments with dogs, where they'd repeatedly shock these poor animals while they were trapped, completely unable to escape.
Yeah, it's a tough one, ethically speaking, and thankfully we've come a long way since then in terms of animal research, but the findings were definitely significant. What they found was that even when they later gave those dogs a way out, a clear path to escape the shocks, they didn't take it. They'd learned to be helpless.
It's heartbreaking, but it speaks volumes about the power of trauma to shape our responses. Their bodies, their very being, had internalized that belief that resistance was futile, even when the threat was no longer present.
It's a tragic illustration of how trauma can rewire our understanding of safety and danger, of our ability to influence our own situations.
Which is exactly what we see time and again with trauma survivors, isn't it? Their bodies, they're trapped in that survival mode, constantly reacting as if the danger is still right there in front of them, even if their conscious mind, their rational mind, knows they're safe in the present moment.
It's a disconnect between knowing and feeling, between the logic of the situation and the visceral experience of the body, and that's where things get really, really interesting.
It's almost like their bodies are stuck, reliving the trauma, stuck in that moment, even though time has moved on.
That's a really good way to put it. You know, Kolk talks about this study where they used brain imaging, fMRI, I think it was, to actually see what's happening in the brain when someone's having a flashback.
Oh, wow. So they can actually see it happening? What did they find? What's going on in there?
Well, they found there's a spike in activity in the amygdala, which is basically the brain's fear center, right? It's like the alarm bell is going off. And at the same time, there's a surge of activity in the right hemisphere of the brain, the part that's all about emotions.
So it's like the brain is literally reliving that traumatic moment, even though the person consciously knows they're safe in the present. There's that disconnect again.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, they found that during these flashbacks, there's actually less activity in Broca's area.
Hold on, Broca's area. That rings a bell. Remind me, what's that one again?
Broca's area. It's the part of the brain that deals with language, with putting your thoughts and feelings into words.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah.
So when that part of the brain goes quiet, is that why it's so difficult for people to talk about their trauma?
That's a big part of it, definitely. It's like the experience, it's literally beyond words.
Yeah.
Especially for trauma that happened in early childhood before those language skills are fully developed, you know?
Wow. So it's like their bodies remember, even if their minds haven't quite caught up yet.
Yeah.
That's heavy stuff.
It is heavy. And it really highlights why just talking about trauma, while helpful, isn't always enough to heal those deep-seated wounds. We have to address the body, too. Those raw, visceral sensations that are trapped inside.
So how do we do that? If the body is stuck in the past, how do we help it catch up to the present moment? Is that even possible?
That's the million-dollar question, and what's so amazing about Kolk's work is that he doesn't just lay out the problem, he offers solutions. He shows us that while trauma can have these profound effects on our brains and bodies, there are absolutely ways to rewire those pathways to help the body, to help the person learn that they're safe again.
There's a hope. There's actually hope for people who have been through these horrific experiences.
Absolutely. There's a lot of hope. And it starts with this fundamental understanding that healing from trauma, it's not about willpower. It's not about just getting over it. It's about addressing both the mind and the body, working with them both to find that sense of safety and peace again.
So it's not just about talking about our problems, but actually finding ways to help our bodies release that trauma they've been holding on to all these years.
You got it. And Kolk, he explores a bunch of different therapeutic approaches that go beyond traditional talk therapy that really tap into that mind-body connection. One of them that's really fascinating is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Have you heard of it?
EMDR, yeah, I've heard the term thrown around, but I'll admit I don't really have a clue how it works. Something to do with eye movements.
All right. So basically with EMDR, they use these guided eye movements to help people process and reframe traumatic memories. It's like by focusing on those eye movements, it somehow unlocks something in the brain, allowing it to recategorize those memories as something that happened in the past, not something that's still happening right now.
So it's like you're helping the brain create a new file for those memories, you know, moving them out of the present danger folder and into the past experiences archive where they belong.
That's a fantastic way to put it. And the cool thing is, EMDR is just one of many approaches out there. There's also yoga, which can be incredibly powerful for regulating the nervous system, helping people reconnect with their bodies in a safe and empowering way.
See, now yoga, that's one I always thought was a bit too, I don't know, new agey for me. But I'm willing to keep an open mind. It's about what works, right?
Absolutely. And the research on yoga and trauma is really promising. It's not just some woo-woo thing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there. There's also theater, believe it or not.
Theater?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a curveball.
Yeah.
How does that even work? Do they have people, like, act out their trauma on stage? Because that sounds kind of intense.
No, it's not about literally reenacting the trauma, thankfully. It's more about using drama, movement, improvisation, those kinds of tools to explore emotions and experiences in a safe, symbolic way.
Ah, okay. So it's more about expressing those trapped emotions than reliving the actual events. I can see how that could be really powerful, especially for folks who have a hard time putting their experiences into words.
Exactly. And then there's the more techie stuff like neurofeedback. Have you come across that one?
Neurofeedback. Vaguely. Something to do with brainwaves, right?
You got it. Essentially, with neurofeedback, they use these sensors to monitor your brain activity in real time. So you can actually see what's happening in your brain in that moment.
So it's like giving someone a live feed of what's going on inside their own head. That's wild.
It is pretty wild. And the really cool thing is, through different exercises and feedback, people can actually learn to consciously change their brainwave patterns. So they can learn to calm down those overactive stress responses that are keeping them trapped in that fight or flight mode.
Wow, so it's like brain training, essentially.
Yeah.
Like going to the gym, but for your neurons.
Exactly. You're training your brain to become more resilient, just like you would train your muscles to be stronger. And what's so exciting about all of this is that these are just a few examples of the many, many approaches that are out there. But the core message, the takeaway, is that healing is possible. Trauma, it doesn't have to be a life sentence. There are ways to heal, to grow, and to thrive, even after the most difficult experiences.
So where do we go from here? If our brains are shaped by our experiences, both the good and the bad, what does that mean for us moving forward? Not just for folks who've been through trauma, but for all of us.
Now that is the question, isn't it? The big one. And it's something I think about all the time. Because if our brains are constantly being shaped, molded by what we experience, that means we have a tremendous capacity for change. We have agency in shaping our own well-being.
Right. I like where you're going with this. So if we're always changing, always adapting, we're not like destined to be prisoners of our past, are we? We actually have a say in the matter, the power to shape our own brains, our own well-being. That's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is. And empowering too, right? We may not be able to just erase what happened, but we can change how our brains and bodies react in the here and now. That's huge.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? What are some things we can start doing, like today, to rewire those circuits, to build up that resilience?
Well, a good starting point is to pay attention to what already makes you feel safe, grounded. You know, those things that bring a sense of calm, of being centered. What comes to mind for you?
What do you think? Being out in nature always helps. There's something about the fresh air, the quiet, that just puts me at ease. Music, too, definitely. And just connecting with people I love, those close to me, those things always make a difference.
There you go. See? Those are all fantastic ways to help your nervous system chill out, to build that resilience we're talking about. Mindfulness, moving your body, getting enough sleep. These aren't just trendy buzzwords. They're like tools, practical things you can do to actually rewire your brain to make it work for you, not against you.
It's like we're not just managing stress, we're actually training our brains to be better equipped to handle it.
Exactly. Like anything else, the more you practice, the stronger those neural pathways become. You get better at handling life's curveballs without getting thrown completely off course.
This has been an incredible conversation, I have to say. Eye-opening, for sure. And it gets me thinking, if we can heal from trauma, if we can rewire for resilience like we've been talking about, what does that mean for how we think about mental health as a society? Feels like a much bigger conversation.
Now there's the million-dollar question, if ever I heard one. It's huge, right? What if, instead of just playing catch-up, always trying to fix things after they break down, what if we focused on prevention? Teaching kids about our brains and their bodies, giving them the tools to understand and manage their emotions from day one.
Imagine that. It's like, what if everyone had a mental health toolkit right from the start? That would change everything.
Right. And it's not just about individual skills. It's about creating communities and systems that prioritize safety, connection, belonging. Because if trauma festers in isolation, in feeling powerless, then the opposite must be true, right? We need to create the conditions for healing, for agency, for people to thrive.
It all circles back to that idea of rewiring, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Not just our individual brains, but the whole system, the way we approach mental well-being on a societal level. To build a world that's more informed, more compassionate, more resilient, man, there's so much potential there, isn't there?
It's exciting to think about, that's for sure.
It really is. And on that note, I think it's time for me to ask our listeners the question I always end on. What resonated with you most from today's deep dive? Was there something that really stood out, something that made you think differently, or inspired you to take action? Maybe it's exploring one of those alternative therapies we discussed, or perhaps it's something as simple as scheduling in some time for yourself in nature. Whatever it is, remember this. Your brain is listening. You have the power to shape it, to heal it, and to help it thrive. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep taking care of yourselves.